Why did you do that?
I only had one deep freezer.
And you feel no remorse for that?
I would kill him again.
She is meant to be the ultimate protector, the first source of love and security, the one person in this world who would sacrifice everything to keep you safe. But what happens when that sacred trust isn't merely broken, but shattered by acts of unimaginable evil? This isn't a story about struggling parents or tragic accidents. This is a horrifying chronicle of mothers who became their children's worst nightmare, women who traded maternal love for calculated cruelty or catastrophic delusion, crossing the threshold from care to catastrophic betrayal. If you're fascinated by the darkest corners of human psychology, hit that subscribe button and notification bell right now. I release new true crime content every week, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below. I'm always curious to see how far these stories reach. Now let's begin our journey into the abyss of maternal betrayal, where home became hell. Why did you do that? I only had one deep freezer. And you feel no remorse for that? I would kill him again. Detroit, Michigan, March 24th, 2015. Court officers arrive at a small rundown apartment on the east side of the city. Their task is routine: serve an eviction notice on a tenant who had fallen behind on rent. But what they're about to uncover inside is anything but routine. Behind the faded curtains and cluttered furniture, inside a battered white freezer, waits one of the most disturbing secrets in American true crime. When the officers pry the freezer door open, they freeze in shock. Inside are the frozen, contorted bodies of two children wrapped in plastic, stacked like discarded leftovers, their faces locked in expressions of terror that had been preserved for years. This was the world of Michelle Blair. She was 35 years old, a mother of 4, living in that same apartment with 2 surviving children. To her neighbors, she seemed strict but ordinary. She kept to herself, sometimes yelling at her kids in public, but nothing that screamed monster. No one realized that 2 of her children, 9-year-old Stephen and 13-year-old Stoney, had not been seen in public in years. Not at school, not at doctor's appointments. They had simply vanished, and nobody noticed. When detectives brought Blair in for questioning, there was no drawn-out denial, no elaborate cover-up. She confessed almost immediately, but what she described was even more horrifying than the discovery itself. "I'm already saying that I did it. I'm freely giving myself and accepting life in prison." According to Blair, both Stephen and Stoney had sexually abused her youngest child. Whether or not this was true has never been fully proven, but instead of seeking help, Blair appointed herself judge, jury, and executioner, and her version of justice was sadistic beyond imagination. She admitted that Stephen's final months in 2012 were filled with relentless torture. She beat him with extension cords until his skin split. She poured scalding hot water on him. She tied plastic bags over his head until he passed out, then ripped them off so he could breathe, only to do it again. She forced him to drink household cleaners like Windex, and then when she decided she was done, she strangled him with her bare hands. She stuffed his small body into the freezer. For Blair, the freezer wasn't just storage. It was her coffin of choice. 9 months later, in May 2013, Blair turned her rage on her daughter, Stoney. She claimed Stoney too had harmed the youngest child. The torture followed the same script: beatings, starvation, suffocation, and when the girl's body finally went limp, Blair smothered her with a plastic bag. Stoney joined her brother in the freezer, stacked above him like trash. For the next 2 years, Michelle Blair lived in that apartment with her 2 surviving daughters. Imagine it, 2 little girls eating breakfast, watching TV, doing homework, while their siblings' frozen corpses sat just feet away. Blair told her daughters never to open the freezer. For them, the appliance became a ghostly presence, something forbidden, something deadly. The discovery of the bodies made headlines around the world. Blair was branded the Freezer Mom. The case wasn't just about murder, it was about prolonged sadistic torture, a crime that played out over years while systems designed to protect children looked the other way. In court, Blair became infamous for her outbursts. She showed no remorse. She screamed at prosecutors, cursed the fathers of her children, and spat at reporters. She declared she would kill again if she ever discovered more abuse. One of her chilling courtroom quotes went viral. "I don't feel no remorse for the death of them demons." The fathers of the dead children sat in shock. One broke down in tears as Blair pointed at him and shouted that he was worthless. Victim impact statements turned into scenes of chaos. Even the judge admitted he had never witnessed such raw hatred in his courtroom. But the true tragedy lies with the surviving daughters. They had grown up watching their siblings vanish. They were silenced with threats. They were forced to live with the smell of decay, the sound of their mother's rage, and the knowledge that disobedience could mean they'd be next. The trial was brief. There was no doubt about her guilt. Blair had confessed the bodies were in her freezer, and her surviving daughters testified about the abuse they endured. In June 2015, Michelle Blair was sentenced to life in prison without parole for 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of torture. The judge called her crimes the ultimate betrayal of motherhood. Even after sentencing, Blair has never expressed regret. In interviews, she repeats the same defense that she was protecting her youngest child. But the sheer cruelty of her methods, the burning, the suffocating, the years of hiding the bodies, reveals something much darker. Today, Michelle Blair sits in the Women's Huron Valley Correctional Facility in Michigan. She is in her mid-40s. She spends her days in isolation, despised by fellow inmates, remembered only as the freezer mom. What makes this case so haunting is not just the brutality, but the secrecy. Stephen and Stoney's absence slipped through the cracks of schools, social services, and neighbors. No one demanded answers. No one knocked on the door. For years, their mother's freezer became their tomb, and nobody knew. Michelle Blair's story is a chilling reminder that evil can live in plain sight, behind closed doors, behind the smile of a mother walking her child to school. Evil that doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it looks like the person you're supposed to trust the most. What time is it where you're watching? Late-night crime sessions hit different. Let me know in the comments. The 1960s and 70s in rural New York were a time when infant deaths were often written off as crib death, what doctors now call sudden infant death syndrome, or SIDS. Families grieved, communities mourned, and science had few answers. But in the case of Waneta Hoyt, SIDS wasn't a medical mystery. It was a mask, one that hid the cold hands of a mother who murdered 5 of her own babies. Waneta was born in 1946, a quiet girl from a poor family in upstate New York. She married young, at just 20 years old, to a man named Tim Hoyt. By the time she was 21, she had given birth to her first child, Eric. From the outside, she appeared to be living the American dream. A young wife, a new baby, and a future to build. But behind the closed doors of the Hoyt household, things were far darker. Eric was only 3 months old when he suddenly died in January 1965. Doctors labeled it crib death, a tragedy, but not unusual at the time. Waneta and Tim buried their son devastated. Just a few months later, their daughter Julie was born, but by September, before she was even 3 months old, she too was dead. Again, crib death. The town grieved with them. 2 babies gone in less than a year. People brought casseroles, hugs, and sympathy. No one suspected anything sinister. Hoyt's 3rd child, James, was born in 1966, but like the others, he didn't live long. He died at just 3 months old. The official cause once again, crib death. By now, whispers had begun in the community. How could one family lose 3 babies in such a short time? But medical science in the 1960s didn't have the tools to challenge the explanation. Doctors told the Hoyts they were simply unlucky. Waneta, meanwhile, played the grieving mother, accepting sympathy while hiding a monstrous secret. Her 4th child, Molly, was born in 1968. Same pattern. 3 months later, she was dead. Then came Noah in 1970. He too was gone within 3 months. 5 children, 5 sudden deaths, all ruled natural. For decades, Waneta Hoyt walked free, her crimes buried with her children. She even became a foster mother and adopted a 6th child who survived. To neighbors, she was a woman of tragedy, a mother cursed by fate. In reality, She was a serial killer hiding behind a medical mystery. The truth only began to emerge in the early 1990s. New studies on SIs showed that the odds of one family losing multiple children to the syndrome were astronomically low. 5 deaths in one family? Almost impossible. A local district attorney reopened the Hoyt cases. Investigators began to suspect that something darker had been at play. In 1994, police brought Waneta in for questioning. She was now in her late 40s, living an ordinary life in a quiet neighborhood. At first, she denied everything. But after hours of pressure, she broke. Her confession stunned detectives. She admitted she had smothered each of her babies with household items, blankets, pillows, whatever was at hand. She described the murders casually, saying she was overwhelmed by their crying and needed it to stop. 5 helpless infants, 5 murders, each carried out by their own mother. At trial, the defense argued that Waneta was mentally impaired with the mind of a teenager, easily manipulated into confessing. But the weight of her words, combined with the sheer improbability of 5 Sid's deaths, was impossible to ignore. In 1995, Waneta Hoyt was convicted of 5 counts of second-degree murder and sentenced to 75 years to life in prison. She never made it that far. In 1998, just 4 years into her sentence, Waneta died of cancer at the age of 52. She went to her grave without ever fully explaining why she did it. The Hoyt case left a deep scar on both the medical and legal communities. For decades, her children's deaths had been written off as natural, allowing a killer to continue unchecked. Doctors were forced to rethink how SIDS is diagnosed, and prosecutors across the country began re-examining suspicious infant deaths that had been quickly labeled as crib death. The story also raised a haunting question. Was Waneta Hoyt simply a mother who snapped under the pressure of caring for multiple babies? Or was she a cold-blooded killer who exploited medical ignorance to get away with murder? What makes her story so terrifying isn't just the body count, it's the betrayal of trust. Babies cry. That's their language, their lifeline. For most mothers, the sound is an instinctual call to comfort and protect. For Waneta, it became a trigger for violence. Instead of cradling her children, she silenced them forever. 5 tiny graves, 5 lives snuffed out before they had a chance to begin, and all by the hands of the woman who was supposed to love them most. Today, Waneta Hoyt's name lives in infamy. Her case is taught in both medical schools and criminal justice classes as a chilling example of how easily evil can be mistaken for tragedy and how long it can take for the truth to come out. If you're finding this content valuable, please take a second to hit that like button. It really helps the channel, and I appreciate your support. In the small town of Raymond, Washington, the Knotek family lived in a modest farmhouse surrounded by forest. To outsiders, they looked ordinary. Shelley Knotek, her husband Dave, and the children who came in and out of their lives. But behind those doors, behind the smiling pictures and friendly waves to neighbors, lurked one of the most sadistic mothers America has ever seen. Michelle Shelley Knotek was born in 1954. From a young age, she learned how to manipulate. She told elaborate lies, spun dramatic stories about illnesses or abuse, and demanded sympathy. As she grew older, she mastered the art of control, not with guns or knives, but with humiliation, guilt, and psychological terror. When she became a mother, she didn't nurture, she destroyed. Shelley's 3 daughters, Nikki, Sammy, and Tori, grew up in a household of constant abuse. Shelley forced them to strip naked and endure beatings. She humiliated them by making them wear oversized diapers as punishment. She starved them, sometimes forcing them to eat their own vomit. She manipulated them with cycles of cruelty and affection, breaking their spirits while convincing them she was their only source of love. But it didn't stop with her daughters. Shelley had a habit of taking in vulnerable people, troubled friends, relatives, or boarders who needed a place to stay. She presented herself as generous, the kind woman who would open her home to those in need. In reality, these people became new victims in her house of horrors. One of them was Kathy Lorino, a hairdresser and family friend. Kathy moved in with the Knoteks in the early 1990s. At first, it seemed like she had found a safe place to land, but Shelley quickly turned on her. She starved Kathy, forced her to do endless chores, humiliated her constantly, and beat her until she was weak and frail. In 1994, Kathy died after years of abuse. Shelley and her husband Dave didn't call the police. Instead, Dave, a Vietnam veteran, admitted later that he burned Kathy's body in the backyard furnace at Shelley's command. For years, Kathy's family searched for her, never knowing she'd been tortured to death just miles away. But Kathy wasn't the only victim. A nephew, Shane Watson, also came to live with the Knoteks. Shane was just a teenager, and at first he bonded with Shelley's daughters. He saw the abuse, recognized it for what it was, and even began documenting it with a secret camera. When Shelley discovered what he was doing, she ordered her husband Dave to kill him. In 1995, Shane was shot in the head. Once again, his body was burned and his disappearance explained away with lies. For years, Shelley kept her grip on everyone in that house. The daughters, terrified of her wrath, remained silent. Dave, loyal and broken, obeyed her commands. Neighbors suspected something strange. The constant movement of people in and out of the house, the stories Shelley told about missing friends or relatives, but nobody could prove anything. It's important to remember that cycles of abuse can be broken. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please reach out to the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. Help is available. By the early 2000s, another victim entered her web. An elderly man named Ron Woodworth moved in after falling on hard times. Just like the others, he was starved, beaten, forced to do endless work, and stripped of his dignity. By 2003, Ron was dead too. His body was disposed of like the others. The turning point came when Shelley's youngest daughter, Tori, broke the silence. Terrified of her mother but desperate to escape, she reached out to relatives and revealed the truth about the House of Horrors. Police investigated, and the walls of Shelley's empire finally collapsed. In 2003, Shelley and Dave Knotek were arrested. The truth spilled out. Years of abuse, manipulation, torture, and multiple deaths. The daughters testified about the nightmare they had endured. Dave confessed to helping dispose of bodies, but placed the blame squarely on Shelley as the mastermind. The trial shocked Washington. Prosecutors called Shelley a sadist who thrived on control and cruelty. Her daughters described years of humiliation that went beyond physical abuse into pure psychological warfare. Neighbors admitted they had long suspected something, but never imagined the scale of horror happening inside that farmhouse. In 2004, Shelley Knotek pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and manslaughter as well as assault charges. She was sentenced to 22 years in prison. Dave received 15 years. For many, the sentence felt far too short. Shelley wasn't just abusive, she was lethal. At least 3 people were dead because of her, and countless others had been scarred for life. The daughters, those survivors, described years of therapy and nightmares that continued long after their mother was locked away. In 2022, Shelley Knotek was released from prison, walking free after serving her sentence. The news horrified her surviving victims, who feared she might once again find vulnerable people to control and destroy. Her story was immortalized in the best-selling book If You Tell by Greg Olson, which gave voice to her daughter's experience and exposed the depths of her sadism to the world. Through their testimony, Shelley became infamous not just as a bad mother, but as one of the most evil maternal figures in modern true crime. What makes her story so chilling is the mix of manipulation and brutality. She didn't act in sudden fits of rage. She calculated. She slowly destroyed the people around her, feeding off their pain, convincing them they had nowhere else to go. She turned her own daughters into silent witnesses to murder, forcing them to live in fear that they would be next. To this day, the name Shelley Knotek stands as a reminder that evil doesn't always come in the form of strangers or serial killers lurking in the shadows. Sometimes it wears the face of a mother, smiling to neighbors, opening her home, while inside it's nothing but terror. What's the weather like where you are? Is it as chilling as these stories? Let me know in the comments below. Some killer mothers lash out in sudden bursts of rage. Others slowly unravel under the weight of stress and trauma. But then there are the cold calculators, the women who plan, who plot, who manipulate. Brenda Andrew wasn't just a killer. She was a con artist, a seductress, and the only woman on Oklahoma's death row. Brenda was born in 1963, raised in a conservative religious family in Oklahoma. To outsiders, she seemed to fit the mold of a classic suburban mom. She married her high school sweetheart, Rob Andrew, and together they had 2 children. The family attended church, volunteered in the community, and presented themselves as a wholesome middle-class household. But behind the image, Brenda was restless. She craved attention, money, and excitement. By the late 1990s, her marriage to Rob was falling apart. Rob was steady, responsible, an advertising executive who provided for the family. Brenda, on the other hand, wanted more, and she found it in the form of an affair with a man named James Pavat, a former insurance salesman and fellow churchgoer. Together, they began a romance built not only on lust, but on greed. Rob had a life insurance policy worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, and Brenda, along with her new lover, wanted it. In November 2001, the trap was set. Brenda invited Rob over to her Oklahoma City home. He thought it would be a routine handoff. Instead, he walked into an ambush. As Rob entered the garage, he was shot twice with a shotgun. The first blast tore through his arm. The second hit his torso. He collapsed on the concrete floor, gasping for breath. Brenda stood nearby, watching as her lover finished the job. Rob bled out within minutes, murdered in cold blood in the very place where he once parked the family car. What makes this case especially chilling is the presence of the children. Brenda's son and daughter were inside the house during the murder, forced to listen as their father's life was stolen. Afterward, Brenda calmly told them their father was dead. Police quickly focused on Brenda. Her story didn't add up. She claimed masked intruders had broken in and attacked Rob, but investigators uncovered the affair, the financial motive, and the insurance papers that linked Brenda and James Pavat to the murder. The duo had meticulously planned the killing down to disabling security systems and preparing getaway routes. When the net closed in, Brenda didn't face justice immediately. Instead, she fled the country with her children, trying to vanish into Mexico. For months, she evaded capture, living on the run, dragging her kids from place to place while law enforcement hunted her. Eventually, she was caught in Mexico in 2002 and extradited back to the United States. Her trial became a media sensation in Oklahoma. Prosecutors painted Brenda as the ultimate femme fatale, a woman who used her sexuality and charm to manipulate men, then turned to murder for money. They revealed that Brenda had staged sexual encounters to distract potential witnesses and even tried to seduce members of her church for help. She wasn't just a killer. She was a predator who used every tool at her disposal to get what she wanted. The most damning evidence came from her children. They testified about the night of the murder, how their father walked into the garage and never came back out. Their voices broke in court as they recounted hearing the gunshots that ended Rob's life. The betrayal was total. Not just a wife betraying her husband, but a mother betraying her children by forcing them to live with the knowledge of what she had done. This story is still unfolding. If you want to stay updated on cases like these and support independent true crime research, tap that subscribe button now. Your subscription helps fund the extensive research that goes into these videos. Not all maternal killers are driven by greed, rage, or sadism. Some are consumed by something equally deadly but far more complex, severe mental illness. On June 20, 2001, in the Houston suburb of Clear Lake, Andrea Yates drowned her 5 children, Noah, 7, John, 5, Paul, 3, Luke, 2, and Mary, 6 months, one by one in the family bathtub. After the last child was dead, she called 911 and then her husband, Rusty. "You need to come home," she told him. "I've done something terrible." When police arrived, they found Andrea in a soaking wet t-shirt, her hair dripping. The 5 children were laid out on the bed covered with a sheet. She confessed immediately, explaining in a flat, detached voice that she had killed her children to save them from Satan. Unlike many cases we've discussed, Andrea Yates's story isn't one of hidden evil or secret abuse. It's a tragedy of untreated mental illness, religious extremism, and systemic failure. Andrea had a documented history of severe postpartum psychosis and depression. After the birth of her fourth child, she had attempted suicide twice, been hospitalized multiple times, and was diagnosed with postpartum psychosis with psychotic features. Doctors had warned her husband that having more children could trigger another psychotic episode. They had even advised that Andrea should not be left alone with the children. Yet, despite these warnings, Andrea had a fifth child. Her condition deteriorated. She stopped eating, barely spoke, and scratched bald spots into her scalp. She had visions of Satan and believed she was a bad mother who was contaminating her children. 2 weeks before the drownings, Andrea's psychiatrist had reduced her medication despite her worsening symptoms. The day before the murders, she was left alone with the children for the first time in weeks. What followed was a methodical horror. Andrea filled the bathtub and one by one drowned each child, starting with the youngest and ending with 7-year-old Noah, who tried to run when he saw his baby sister floating in the water. In her psychotic state, Andrea believed she was saving her children from eternal damnation. She was convinced that because she was a bad mother, her children would grow up to be corrupt and would burn in hell. By killing them young, she thought she was ensuring their place in heaven. Her trial became a national debate about mental illness, motherhood, and criminal responsibility. Initially convicted of capital murder in 2002, her conviction was overturned on appeal when it was revealed that a prosecution witness had given false testimony. In her 2006 retrial, the jury found Andrea not guilty by reason of insanity. She was committed to a state mental hospital, where she remains today. Unlike the other mothers in our series, Andrea Yates has expressed profound remorse. As her psychosis cleared with proper treatment, the reality of what she had done crushed her. She has attempted suicide multiple times in custody. Her case sparked important conversations about postpartum mental health, the pressures of motherhood, and the failures of our mental health system. It raised questions about religious extremism, as Andrea and Rusty had been influenced by a traveling preacher who emphasized having many children and traditional gender roles. What makes the Yates case so devastating is its preventability. There were so many warning signs, so many opportunities for intervention. Doctors knew she was at risk, her family knew she was struggling, yet somehow 5 children ended up dead. Today, Andrea Yates lives in a state mental hospital, where she will likely remain for the rest of her life. She spends her days making crafts that are sold anonymously, with proceeds going to a charity for women's mental health. Her story stands as a stark reminder that not all evil comes from malice. Sometimes it comes from minds broken by illness, from systems that fail to protect the vulnerable, and from a society that still struggles to understand the darkest corners of maternal mental health. The cases we've explored so far are just the tip of a dark iceberg. For every Michelle Blair or Shelley Knotek whose crimes made national headlines, there are others whose stories are equally disturbing but less well known. Take Susan Smith, who in 1994 strapped her 2 young sons, Michael, 3, and Alex, 14 months, into their car seats, then rolled her car into a South Carolina lake, drowning them both. For 9 days, she appeared on national television, tearfully pleading for the return of her children, claiming a black man had carjacked her vehicle with the boys inside. The racial element of her lie sparked a manhunt that targeted innocent black men throughout the region. When the truth emerged, that Smith had killed her sons because they were an obstacle to a relationship with a man who didn't want children, the nation was stunned. She was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Then there's Diane Downs, whose story was immortalized in the book and miniseries Small Sacrifices. In 1983, Downs drove to an Oregon hospital with 3 gravely wounded children, Christy, 8, Cheryl, 7, and Danny, 3, claiming a bushy-haired stranger had shot them during a carjacking. Cheryl died. The other children survived with permanent disabilities. Investigators soon discovered that Downs herself had shot her children, motivated by a relationship with a married man who didn't want kids. Her surviving daughter, Christy, eventually testified against her, sealing her conviction. Downs received a life sentence plus 50 years. She briefly escaped from prison in 1987, but was recaptured. To this day, she maintains her innocence despite overwhelming evidence. More recently, in 2014, Pleasant Grove, Utah police discovered 7 infant remains concealed in boxes in Megan Huntsman's garage. She admitted that between 1996 and 2006, while addicted to methamphetamine, she had strangled or suffocated 6 newborns immediately after birth. A 7th was stillborn. Her ex-husband, who discovered the bodies, claimed no knowledge of the pregnancies. Huntsman received 6 terms of 5 years to life, effectively barring parole until at least 2064. What connects these cases? What turns a mother, the very embodiment of protection and nurture, into a killer? Criminologists point to several patterns. Some killings stem from untreated mental illness, as with Andrea Yates. Others involve substance abuse, as with Megan Huntsman. Many involve a toxic relationship, where children become obstacles to a new romance or pawns in a power struggle with a partner. Social isolation plays a crucial role too. Michelle Blair, Shelley Knotek, and Waneta Hoyt all operated in environments where their behavior went unchecked. No neighbors intervened, no teachers asked the right questions, no doctors connected the dots. And then there's the most disturbing factor: opportunity. Mothers have unparalleled access to their children. They're trusted implicitly. When a child disappears or dies, a mother's grief is rarely questioned. This perfect storm of trust, access, and presumed innocence creates the conditions where maternal killers can operate undetected, sometimes for years. The warning signs were there in almost every case: multiple unexplained deaths in the Hoyt family, visible abuse in the Blair household, mental health crises for Andrea Yates. But these red flags were missed, dismissed, or inadequately addressed until it was too late. I'm curious, which of these cases disturbs you the most and why? Share your thoughts in the comments section. We began this journey by asking, what happens when the sacred trust between mother and child is shattered? The stories we've explored provide a chilling answer. Michelle Blair, who tortured her children before stuffing them in a freezer. Waneta Hoyt, who smothered 5 infants and hid behind medical mystery for decades. Shelley Knotek, who turned her home into a torture chamber. Brenda Andrew, who orchestrated her husband's murder for insurance money. Andrea Yates, whose untreated psychosis led to an unthinkable tragedy. These women don't define motherhood, they deform it. They remind us that the greatest danger can lurk where we feel safest, behind the closed doors of home. But these stories also hold lessons. They teach us about the importance of mental health care, especially for new mothers. They highlight the need for vigilant child welfare systems that take reports seriously. They underscore how crucial it is for communities to be engaged, for neighbors to check on isolated families, for schools to follow up when children go missing. Most of all, they remind us that evil doesn't always announce itself. It can wear the face of the suburban mom next door, the grieving mother on TV, the woman at church who takes in troubled teens. The mothers we've discussed tonight sit in prison cells or psychiatric facilities. Their children lie in graves. But for every case that ends in headlines and life sentences, there are countless near misses, situations where intervention came just in time, where a teacher reported suspicious bruises, where a doctor questioned too many accidents, where a neighbor called police after hearing screams. Those interventions don't make the news. They don't become documentaries, but they save lives. If you've found value in this exploration of darkness, please take a moment to like this video, share it with others who appreciate true crime analysis, and subscribe to my channel for more deep dives into the most disturbing cases in criminal history. Remember, understanding evil isn't about sensationalism, it's about recognition. It's about seeing the warning signs before tragedy strikes. It's about protecting the most vulnerable among us from those who should love them most. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and remember that sometimes the monsters aren't under the bed. They're tucking you in. If you made it this far, you're clearly as fascinated by true crime as I am. Hit that subscribe button and notification bell right now so you never miss an upload. And if you found this video valuable, sharing it helps the channel grow. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.